you're talking about gender pronouns in newspaper articles.
So I'm going to be looking at preferred gender pronouns and how they're discussed in online newspaper articles and the media in general. So I'm just going to do a quick what, why and how. So what I was looking at, these were my research questions. As choosing preferred gender pronouns becomes a more widely accepted choice in social settings and official documentation, how is this issue considered and discussed in the media? And does the way this topic is presented affect the opinions and the attitudes of the audience? So preferred gender pronouns are just the pronouns that someone prefers to use. So there are the traditional pronouns, kind of he, she, and their uses, and then also non-binary pronouns, which don't denote a specified gender in a kind of male or female binary. So why there's approximately 641,000 people in the UK who, as of 2015, identified as being gender non-conforming in some way. So it's not a small issue. There's a large number of people who identify with this, at least in some small way. And it's also not a new issue. As early as 1878, Napoleon Bonaparte Brown argued that the need for a new pronoun was so desperate, urgent and imperative that it should long since have grown in our speech. And that need it's still not really been addressed today. So how I looked at online newspaper articles, I specifically chose the media because the media has such a big influence over our opinions on how language is becoming more and more commonplace, how aspects of language become more commonplace. We're all in touch with the media all the time, every day. There's no getting away from it. And I used newspaper articles from 2015 because there were many events that kind of sparked discussion around pronouns, what pronouns should be used. Things like the Bruce, Caitlyn Jenner scenario, the fact that Sweden introduced the gender-neutral pronoun into their official dictionary. American universities started letting students register with their preferred pronouns rather than having to pick specifically male or female. So there was quite a lot of discussion. So I picked 4 looking at those kind of topics. Because the effective media power are cumulative, and that's how readers get their positions from the media that they're consuming. So I used critical discourse analysis because that's a way of looking at how power and inequality are enacted through language, through both the concrete data of the discourse itself as well as the social context that it's presented in, and it can be used as a way of working towards social justice. So as well as my what, why and how, I also split my literature review and kind of previous research into 3 categories. So starting with questioning the binary. It's quite a long quote, but I think it's important. So Bing and Bergvall, because the terms male and female insufficiently categorise our experience, English also includes all these other options. And the negative connotations often associated with these words suggest that although such a multiplicity exists, these are aberrations and departures from a basic dichotomy, female and male. The simple belief in only 2 is not an experimental given, but a normative social construction. So it's just emphasising that male and female is not enough, there are all these other categories as well. So in terms of performing gender through language, obviously the main proponent is Butler, Butler's gender troubles, using phrases like, I now pronounce you man and wife and it's a girl, as ways of stating gender or sex, building on Austen and Searle's speech acts, in that the act of saying it makes it so. Butler also argued that language can be used in order to construct gender, and gender is therefore something that we do rather than who we are. Romain said that when children learn to talk, they learn to create a linguistic sense of self, and this self is gendered from a very early age. So this reflects the fact that when children are taught to speak, if they're taught to use only male or female pronouns, then they're taught that that is the way that they should be, and that those are the only correct or standard ways of using language. Zimmerman and Hall also wrote a paper on language embodiment and the third sex, looking at the language used by gender-variant communities. And they justified their paper saying we present their communicative acts to call attention to the way in which biological sex is as much a product of everyday interaction as is social gender. So the language is just a way of expressing themselves, it's not putting people into categories. And the history of English grammar and gender, Barron in 1986 wrote, grammarians have treated the masculine gender as primary in order of creation and in importance, both in the natural world and in the sentence. So as far as he's concerned, in many ways and for many years, the masculine gender has been treated as the standard or the most important. Curzan in 2003, Gender Shifts in the History of English. English has shifted from a morphological gender assignment system to a semantic one, showing that gender has now become less of just the grammatical structure of a sentence or a word, and now refers to our identity. Curzan also observes the shift from the generic masculine pronoun to the less sexist he/she. So if the gender is unknown, rather than using he, it's now shifted more to he/she. So in terms of my data, as I said, I looked at 4 online newspaper articles, 2 from The Guardian, 1 from The Spectator, and 1 from The National Review. So I've just got one example from each article. So the Spectator article was written on the 7th of February 2015 with the headline, "They want a gender-neutral pronoun, what's wrong with them?" The article, it could be considered circular in that it begins with pejorative language choices and also ends with them, with the final sentence being, "We'll all be the same, such a magnificent first world delusion." So you have words like wrong in the very headline, suggesting that anybody who agrees with the fact that maybe we need a gender neutral pronoun, that they're wrong in some way, and delusional. Gary Nunn in March in The Guardian writes about the fact that Sweden have added the gender neutral pronoun to their official dictionary. So it, being hen, resurfaced around 2000 when the country's small transgender community latched onto it, and its use has taken off in the past few years. So it could be argued that the use of the small transgender community is implying that only transgender people use these pronouns and that therefore they are solely responsible for its use, which may or may not be true in the case of Sweden. But there's also some interesting points to draw about the pre-modifying adjective small, in the fact that it diminishes the power and the authority that that community has. So even though it's a mostly positive article and on the whole, even the language choices still betray some kind of bias towards it. The third article is from The Guardian from April, talking about Bruce Jenner. And this article was written after the interview that Bruce Jenner did with Diane Sawyer at the 2020 interview, and before the Vanity Fair cover, at which point he had come out as transgender, but stated that he still preferred to use male pronouns. And that the article is about respect, as the headline says. So the least we can do is have respect, even if we never fully understand how he sees things. He can figure his stuff out, we can figure out our own, and hopefully we'll all continue to learn from each other along the way. And McConnell does this all the way through the article, using the inclusive we as a way of including the readers in his own opinion that by not using someone's preferred pronouns that you are disrespecting them. And it ends with this powerful message that the community of people who are using these pronouns have something to teach the wider public, and that we should continue to learn from them, as in we already have. And the fourth article is from the National Review from November, with the simple question headline, "What are your pronouns?" Which then goes on to give statements like, "Words that new pronoun advocates use over and over are unsafe and invalidated," but invalidated is coming on a bit strong. And odd sexual conditions and these linguistic contortions are absurd, and so are the hypersensitivities that go with them. So all of these statements are used just to diminish the feelings of people who want to use these pronouns, and dismisses the idea that language should reflect non-binary identities at all. So the conclusions. My research question, how is this considered and discussed? The issue is obviously being discussed at opposite ends of the spectrum, both positive aspects in terms of respect and validating people's identities, and also at the more negative end of the spectrum where supporters are being mocked and portrayed as less intelligent. And does the way this topic is presented affect the audience? Well, yes, of course it does. It's seen as a relatively new concept, and therefore is kind of new and a bit strange, and it's surrounded by some level of confusion. But that could be alleviated at least a little if there is some correct political terminology being used in these articles. Some of them are trying, but the point is that they're not always accurately defined, and that would be a very useful way of teaching people and improving the situation. Because these articles are used as a source of information for the wider general public. So it would be useful to have them accurately represented. And so my final conclusion is the media holds a great power over its audience, and writers must be aware that their writing affects the mindset, opinions and levels of acceptance of the wider public. Change is needed so that preferred gender pronouns become more commonplace and accepted, and the media needs to be at the forefront of this change. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Clarify your data. One of the articles was about the new words in Swedish, so that was the story.
Yeah.
The other one was Bruce Jenner,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a celebrity story. Yeah. The other two I missed. What were the stories? Why is it news? I can't remember.
Let me just go back. So the Nordlinger from the National Review was talking about a conference dinner that he'd been to at an American university where they had just introduced this concept of when a student registers that they can pick their pronouns.
Okay, so that's news report. Okay,
yeah.
Right. And what was the other one?
Other one,
no, the one forward.
This one?
Yeah. I've never read The Spectator.
No, this was.
This just looks like a platform for somebody to just sort of, shout.
There was a university in America, Texas, I think, that had introduced this system for the September 2014 for their intake then, and allowed them to register. And there'd been a lot of dispute, and so they had recently removed that option, and this was in response to why was there such a fuss.
So they all are very loosely news, but they feel to me like people are latching on a very tiny little thing to have a pop.
Yeah, it's that.
Say again?
That is what the media does.
Well, yes, yeah,
but no, they're all using a vaguely news-related story in order to convey some kind of opinion on preferred gender pronouns.
Can I ask another practical? The hen one.
Yeah.
You said it was diminutive. Is that the form in Swedish has got some semantic meaning of diminution?
No, I meant the word small, as in the small transgender community.
Oh, the small transgender.
Because when I looked up the statistics for the number, actually it's not small at all.
That particular article,
The Spectator one.
yeah, the full thing, was it saying that there shouldn't be a gender neutral pronoun?
Yeah,
That was
basically.
just the whole thing that just said that they shouldn't.
It's ridiculous, and we shouldn't bother.
So it wasn't a pun on
What's
why
wrong
don't
with
just use the word them instead?
Yeah, that's what I got from it.
I don't know. It's quite a cleverly written article, and I wonder if it was written in order to provoke responses. I would like to think it's a pun. That would make me happy. Hiya.
Yeah. So English as well as German has one, which is it.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, with children.
Non-human.
Yeah, but children you call it it.
Only babies.
Yeah, babies. But at what point are babies not it's anymore, but he or she? And that's.
I would argue when they're born.
Yeah, pretty soon.
Mhm.
Because they're named, probably.
Yeah, it's just about the name, right?
It's very unusual to use it for any human, and it's usually not positive if you do. If you refer to something as it, you are
It's quite
using
dehumanising.
their humanity.
Yeah. I once know a story of somebody who was restraining their dog from biting somebody, and the way they told their dog to not bite this person was, leave it! But obviously that's because dogs don't understand gender pronouns.
Can I comment on that one as well? I can't remember where I was talking about this, but it was something to do with size of animals, and you'd call like a fly it, and some people wouldn't call.
Animacy.
Yes, that talk, and it was kind of similar to that sort of thing, that you wouldn't call a baby it because it's
It's not
not.
on the level of animacy that something has how close we feel to the.
So your pet is a he or she.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
but a fly
that
might be
other
it.
dog is
Yeah.
not.
Or a cow could perhaps be in it, or
A
an
feral
elephant.
dog is an it, but your own pet is a he or she.
So a baby probably would be.
Your baby is probably a he or she.
Yeah. And to be fair, in politeness ways to other people, I feel like it's a politeness thing you can call.
Just to say on that thing, I haven't done much research on gender and non-binary, but I've done a lot of research on gay language. But is it more a self-identity thing? Like if someone says that's their identity, you
Yes.
confirm that you don't fight their identity. But
Like a name.
but
Yeah, exactly.
my question was, so you say there needs to be a change in discourse in the media. That's how we bring about change. How do we bring about a change in the media? In your opinion?
By using the pronouns that people want you to use, and by giving definitions of terminology that you're using, so that there is no confusion over what non-binary means. Because they're just, in a lot of these articles that I read, there just isn't any explanation. And there's either a word just put in and then skated over, or there were a couple of occasions where a word would be used and then in like parentheses afterwards would just go, I don't know either. And it's that kind of, those little quips aren't helpful. At the back.
This is more of a comment than a question, but I kind of feel that if a gender-neutral pronoun is adopted in the language, people who identify as male or female might be offended if someone addresses them in a gender-neutral pronoun.
Well,
Precisely
maybe it works the
because-
other way around too.
Precisely because, like, at the whole, like, why don't we have it? For the same reason, like, the people who oppose having a gender-neutral pronoun might also be offended if somebody addresses them with that pronoun.
But I would argue that, I'd argue that by having a gender neutral pronoun, you at least give that option to be respectful, and by using that, you're not making any judgment on how a person defines their gender.
Yeah, it definitely should be like that. I'm just saying that things might go in a different
Yeah.
direction if such pronouns is introduced.
And of course, the other option is just to ask someone what pronouns they would prefer you use for them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like Bruce Jenner.
Yeah.
I would already argue that in some sense at least we do use gender neutral pronouns, and like for example we use them in a singular sense. Like for example when you're driving in a car and someone cuts in front of you, you don't say, oh, he or she cut me off. You say, they cut me off, even though you know it's referring to one singular driver.
Yeah.
We do this already even without thinking about it. So I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to go from using a singular gender neutral pronoun to refer to people not in your line of sight to using it to someone who requests it.
So you say this kind of media coverage is not helping, and there should be a different one. Do you think that it would be more useful if there was just like if they're reporting about someone, they just use the preferred article, but they don't make a fuss about it. They just use it and that's it. Or if there is a positive discourse about using the preferred article, so it's not seen as the normal thing, but as something that should be normal, but that is worth a discussion.
I think, personally, I think it would be nice if in the future we can get to the point where you just use someone's preferred pronouns without needing to comment on it or make any fuss at all. I think at the minute the state is such that there needs to be some kind of explanation, even if it's just saying this is what they want to be known by, and that's. But I don't think articles like these where they're poking fun at it is helping at all.
There was mention of how can this sort of help? How can we make newspapers start talking about this in the right sort of way? And I was kind of wanting to know whether or not, or whose responsibility is it? So obviously there's a big concept that it's not the trans community's responsibility to educate people about it, because people should educate themselves. But also there's an element of having a voice to be able to explain it as well, and to be able to have. So I'm just kind of, whose responsibility is it? Yeah.
And in terms of the media, I would argue that it's largely the writer's responsibility to make sure that what they're writing is respectful and accurate, and then that moves up the chain into kind of, you know, the editors, people who are publishing these articles should perhaps have some kind of reference of, oh, that's possibly not a very nice thing to say. But no, it's not, it shouldn't be the responsibility of the people who want to use these pronouns to educate everybody else, because as far as I'm concerned, everybody should want to be respectful.
Otherwise you're making people come out, as Nick was talking about
Yes.
the other day, you're making people come out every single time,
exactly.
having to justify themselves when they shouldn't need to justify themselves.
So in terms of bringing about the change, would you say then logically the biggest step should be to change the law, as in gender non-binary currently not recognised by law, unfortunately, is a big gap, it's a huge area of discrimination. In terms of transgender people who aren't gender non-binary, who assign themselves a pronoun male, not man or woman, they're protected under law, so therefore the journalists should, as in they are, you know,
obliged.
yeah, they're going against the morality of society by not using he or she. But would you say like the biggest step for sort of linguists then would be advocating for legally recognising gender non-binary?
I think it would certainly be a good step to have the more the neutral pronouns are recognised in more official documentation, in things like the law, the more it will become the norm for them to be used. Because it kind of filters down to this process. If you've got it in the laws, then newspapers have to start using it, and then the wider public consume those newspapers, and then it becomes just more commonplace.
This is perhaps not so much of a question, but more of a kind of contribution. You mentioned that Napoleon Bonaparte Brown was writing in the 19th century about how there should be a singular gender-neutral pronoun. I know at around this time there was a proposed gender-neutral pronoun, thon.
Yeah.
What do you think about that being proposed as a possible gender-neutral pronoun to be used today?
I think the problem is that it's so far removed from the generic pronouns that people are already used to, which
Doesn't end in E.
yeah, but it's a completely new word. Whereas they in the singular is not so much of a stretch for people because they're already used to they as a plural. Whereas to try and introduce an entire new concept is perhaps more difficult.
I think it's less of introducing a new concept, but more of introducing well, not an exactly new word, but an unfamiliar one.
Yeah.
To fill a gap, because I imagine that among the wide range of gender-neutral pronouns that are being proposed, that people are using, not every non-binary person will agree with using.
Yes.
They'll still be searching for one, and it might be that thought is one that works for them.
Which again leads to, as far as I'm concerned, the best way to deal with it is just to ask each person individually what pronouns they would prefer you to use.
And make that common practice.
And make that common practice, exactly. Bless you.
I would say that part of the problem with introducing a new pronoun is also that people not only don't know how to use it in the sense that they don't know who wants to be addressed by it, but also what about his and her? What is the form for that new word then?
The derivatives.
And like, what do you do is there a plural for it? And that kind of stuff that comes with it is just very easy. We just have the paradigm for the words that we know.
Yeah.
But we actually have to learn the whole paradigm for new words.
Yeah.
Sorry, just going into the next talk yet, so I don't know what to do.
well, some people might want to go from this one to that one. So
Yeah, so it is like 5, so it's a 3.
3. So
I'm
should
24
stop.
out of time, it's confusing me, sorry. So,
I think clapping is probably a good thing to do.
yeah.